Okay, let's unpack this. You've handed us a stack of sources, and as always, we're going to take a deep dive into them, pull out the key insights just for you.
And this time it's uh, fascinatingly specific, isn't it? A market forecast report all about global drink hoses.
Drink hoses, yeah, exactly. Something you probably, well, never think about.
Right. Almost never.
But this report says maybe we should. So our mission today is to get past just the raw numbers,
Yeah.
unpack what this forecast really tells us about the scale, the growth for this, well, seemingly tiny thing.
It definitely tells a surprising story. I mean, the source is forecasting a market worth over $9 billion
Yeah.
by 2033. $9 billion for basically tubes that carry drinks.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you put it like that.
The numbers are huge, yeah. But the report also hints at why it's growing so much, and crucially, where.
Exactly. Okay, so let's start with that big picture, the global view from the report. What are we looking at overall?
So globally, back in 2021, the market was valued at just over $5 billion. 5,021.42 million, to be precise.
$5 billion already. Okay.
And the projection, according to this source, is for that to climb pretty dramatically to over $9.2 billion.
9,226.04 million by 2033.
Yep. That's almost doubling the market size in, what, about 12 years?
So the report mentions a compound annual growth rate, a CAGR, of 5.2% over that time.
It does, 5.2%.
Which I guess sounds okay, but is that particularly good for, well, for hoses? Does the report give context?
Yeah, it frames that 5.2% as remarkably solid, consistent growth for something many people would just assume is a mature market, a basic
Oh,
component.
yeah, not some flashy new tech.
Exactly. So that steady 5.2% suggests there's some strong sort of foundational demand tied into bigger global trends, which the source does get into.
Okay, so if 5.2% global growth is strong, let's look at where the report says it's even more dynamic. This is where the story gets interesting, right? About where it's thriving.
Definitely. The source points strongly to Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
Calls it a key growth engine.
Okay, Asia Pacific, what are the numbers there?
So it's shown going from about $1.79 billion in 2021
Right.
to a projected $3.4 billion by 2033. Nearly $3.4 billion.
That's a regional CGR of what, 5.49%, slightly above the global average.
Exactly. And yeah, China's a huge part of that. The projection shows this market nearly doubling.
But it wasn't just China, right? I noticed the report also mentioned Japan and India hitting pretty significant numbers too, hundreds of millions by 2033.
That's right. But what the source really flags as noteworthy in APAC is the rest of APAC segment.
Ah, okay, the catch-all category.
Yeah. That bit lumps together lots of smaller or emerging economies in the region. And it shows a really robust 6.6% CAGR.
Oh, wow. So faster than China, faster than the regional average, faster than global.
Precisely. And the report suggests that's because of broad expansion drivers, things like more industrialization, rising incomes, maybe shifts in how people consume things across a whole bunch of different developing markets there.
That's interesting. That collective growth in the smaller markets points to some underlying shifts. Okay, speaking of high growth, the Middle East, the report flags that one too.
It does, yeah. Very dynamic. The source forecasts the Middle East market will more than double, from $236 million in 2021 to over $516 million by 2033.
And the growth rates, the CGRs there, seemed really high in the report, some of the highest overall.
Absolutely. You've got Saudi Arabia at 6.67%. UAE at 6.54%, and the rest of Middle East category also strong, 6.6%. Turkey's also mentioned as a significant contributor there, by the way, projected over $128 million.
So why such high rates there? Does the source give any clues about what's driving that acceleration compared to, say, the global average?
It links it pretty directly to big investments in infrastructure in the region. Rapid urbanization, plus growth in food and beverage processing and hospitality sectors, especially in places like Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
Okay, so hotels, restaurants, drink production lines.
Exactly. Those are major users of these hoses. So the forecast is basically saying that specific economic development is pulling up the demand for hoses.
That makes sense. Tying it directly to that kind of development explains those higher numbers. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. What about the bigger, maybe more established markets, like North America, detailed in the source?
Right. North America was already pretty substantial, over $1.4 billion back in 2021.
And growing to over $2.5 billion by 2033, according to the forecast.
That's the projection. And the U.S. is, well, clearly the giant there, expected to hit over $2.1 billion itself by 2033.
Yeah, dominates the region. But I saw an interesting note in the report about Mexico, Smaller market overall, but its growth rate.
Yeah, its projected CGR is 6.21%, highest in North America.
So, any specific reason given in the source for why Mexico is growing faster than the US or Canada?
The report doesn't go super deep on every single country's drivers, unfortunately, but it does note Mexico's rate is outpacing its neighbors. It generally links it to expanding manufacturing, maybe more demand in consumer industries using these hoses.
Okay. And Canada's still significant too.
Oh yeah. Expected to reach almost $290 million by 2033, based on the forecast.
Got it. Okay, let's cross the Atlantic. Europe, another major market the report covers.
Yep, similar size bracket to North America, actually. Just under $1.2 billion in 2021.
And forecast to reach over $2.1 billion by 2033.
That's right. The source lists the big players. UK, Germany, France, all expected to be in the hundreds of millions range by 2033. UK around $333 million, Germany over $411 million, France near $293 million. Also mentions Italy, Russia, Spain, others.
But just like in Asia Pacific, there was that rest of category again, rest of Europe.
Exactly, and similar story there too. That segment shows a particularly strong CAGR, 7.28%.
Wow, 7.28%. That's really high. Way above the European average, even higher than the rest of APAC, growing from about $120 million to over $310 million.
Is significant growth.
So what's going on in that diverse group of countries? What does the source suggest is driving that growth?
Again, it doesn't break down every single country in that bucket, but it highlights that it represents a really broad mix of economies.
Right.
The high KGR suggests there are growth drivers spread across many of them.
Hmm.
Could be things like more automation in food and beverage making,
Maybe.
expansion of hotels, restaurants, or maybe even shifts in what people are drinking, needing different kinds of dispensing systems or packaging that uses these hoses.
That's a key pattern. The report seems to highlight these collective rest of categories showing surprisingly strong growth.
Yeah.
Okay, what other regions does the report cover? South America.
South America, yeah. A smaller piece of the global pie compared to North America or Europe. Projected to grow from around $206 million in 2021 to about $323 million by 2033. Brazil is noted as the main market there, expected to reach almost $158 million. Mentions Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Chile too.
And finally, the report included Africa.
It did. Africa's market is projected to grow from about $161 million in 2021 to $286 million by 2033.
And the key players mentioned there.
South Africa is highlighted as the largest listed, projected to hit $133 million. Nigeria also significant, around $55 million. The rest of Africa's segment is shown with more stable growth, around 4.4% CAGR.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together from the source. What's the big takeaway here beyond just a lot of numbers?
Well, the main thing is we're talking about a multi-billion-dollar global market for something pretty mundane, right? Drink hoses.
Yeah.
And it's projected for solid, consistent growth over the next decade, heading towards that $9 billion mark.
But it's not just growing evenly everywhere.
No, definitely not. That regional breakdown is key. Places like Asia Pacific and the Middle East, and even those rest of Europe type segments, are growing notably faster than the global average.
And the report ties that growth to specific things.
Yeah, things like industrial expansion, building booms, big investments in food and beverage infrastructure, but maybe also, changing lifestyles. Leisure activities. Think about those hydration packs people use for hiking. They have drink hoses.
Right. Good point. Or even just the sheer number of soda fountains, coffee dispensers, beer taps.
Exactly. It makes you realize how these simple bits are, woven into huge global economic trends, societal trends, often totally unseen, from a factory floor to a fast food place.
So the source's advice about tracking these regional trends really makes sense. It's actually a surprisingly dynamic area.
It really is. The scale, the steady growth.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable for what it is.
So what does this all mean for you listening in? You've taken this deep dive with us into the global drink hose market forecast. Now it's a huge growing industry, over $9 billion projected, driven by some really concrete trends identified in the report.
And as you think about that picture, those numbers, and especially those regional differences the source points out, the place is growing much faster than average.
Sure.
Here's something to chew on. Beyond the obvious industrial stuff the report mentions, what other, maybe less obvious shifts could be going on? Changes in maybe global leisure or technology or something completely unexpected? What might be fueling that surprisingly fast growth for drink hoses in places like parts of the Middle East or that rest of Europe group? The data suggests there are some powerful forces at work under the surface. Okay, let's jump in. You shared some fascinating sources with us about Drink hoses.
Drink hoses, yeah. Not exactly glamorous, maybe?
Not at first glance. But seriously, you look at the reports, the research you sent over, and you find this whole global market that's, well, way more complex and vital than you'd ever guess.
It really is. So our mission today, basically, is to pull out the key stuff, the really important takeaways from your material on this market.
Right. What's driving it? What are the real challenges people are facing?
Exactly. And also what's coming next. There's some genuinely interesting innovation happening. It's not just a simple tube, believe me. Think
Right.
material science, regulation.
Okay, so let's start with the drivers.
Sure.
What's pushing this market? I mean, beyond the obvious fact that drinks need to get from point A to point B.
Well, a really big factor in the sources is just the huge scale of food and beverage processing worldwide.
Okay.
And that's amplified by rapid urbanization in a lot of places. More cities mean more demand for centrally processed drinks, packaged drinks.
Makes sense.
And those big operations, they rely on miles, literally miles of these very specific hoses. They have to meet super strict sanitary standards.
Like FDA rules,
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Precisely. FDA, NSF, that's another body certifying food-grade parts, and EU regulations, too. It's all about preventing contamination. Zero risk allowed.
Yeah, you can't mess around with hygiene there. And I gather the way we're actually consuming drinks is also shaking things up.
Oh, absolutely. A huge driver mentioned is the boom in on-tap systems, and not just for beer anymore.
Right, I see that everywhere now.
Exactly. Coffee shops with cold brews on tap, restaurants with juices, kombucha, even those self-serve places. All those systems need hoses. And they need to be food grade, sure, but also really flexible for complex setups.
Right, got to snake around things.
Yeah, and durable too, handle pressure changes.
Hmm.
And crucially, they can't affect the taste. Non-tainting is the term.
So the hose itself doesn't make the drunk taste funny.
Exactly. The quality of the pour, the whole experience, depends partly on that hose. So as demand for these, premium on-tap experiences grows, so does the need for better hoses.
Okay, so you've got massive industrial scale demand plus this consumer-facing on-tap growth. But I imagine meeting all that need isn't easy. Must be hurdles.
Definitely are. Cost is a big one highlighted in the sources. The materials needed aren't cheap.
Because they have to be so pure.
Exactly. To meet the food safety rules and handle all sorts of different liquids, acidic juices, dairy, whatever, without breaking down or tainting the flavor, manufacturers use advanced stuff like platinum-cured silicone, specialized thermoplastics.
Sounds expensive.
It is. Making these materials is complex, so the hoses cost a lot more than, say, a standard industrial water hose. And that cost can be tough, especially for smaller businesses or in developing markets.
And I guess the hoses themselves take a beating from different drinks, cleaning chemicals.
You got it. Exposure to harsh cleaning stuff, high temperatures for sanitizing, maybe abrasive liquids. It all degrades the hose material over time. Shortens the lifespan.
Which means more maintenance, more replacements.
More costs, potential downtime. Yeah, and then there's another headache. Counterfeits.
Oh, fake hoses.
Yeah, cheaper ones that look okay but use dodgy materials, maybe lack the proper safety certifications. That's a serious health risk, obviously.
Wow, okay. So high costs for the good stuff, risk of failure, risk of fakes. Tricky. But what's exciting? What trends are emerging from the research?
Yeah, this is where it gets pretty innovative. A big one is putting antimicrobial properties directly into the hose material itself.
Okay, how does that help?
It basically stops microbes, bacteria, from growing inside the hose, reduces that slimy biofilm buildup.
Less gunk.
Right. Which means you don't need to clean them as often or as harshly. For big plants running 24/7, reducing cleaning time is a huge efficiency gain. Less downtime.
Always good. What about sustainability? That's everywhere now.
It's definitely a focus here, too. There's a lot of R&D going into eco-friendly materials. People are looking at bio-based polymers or ways to use recycled content.
But can they still meet those super strict hygiene standards?
That's the challenge. Balancing sustainability with absolute safety and performance. It's tough, complex material science, but that's the direction things are headed, driven by regulations and, brands wanting to be greener.
Any other tech beyond the material itself?
For sure. We're starting to see smart hose systems, hoses with sensors built in.
Sensors for what?
They can monitor things like flow rate, temperature, pressure, maybe even detect early signs that the material is getting worn out or that buildup is starting. Connects to the IoT.
Internet of Things for hoses?
Kind of, yeah. It lets users move towards predictive maintenance, fix problems before they cause a shutdown, optimize how the whole system runs.
Huh. So when you think about all this, The strict hygiene rules, the fancy materials, the consumer trends like on tap, and now antimicrobial tech, eco-materials, smart sensors.
It really shows how this thing we probably never think about, a drink hose, is actually this sophisticated bit of engineering. It's constantly adapting to health rules, market demands, new tech.
Yeah.
They're like these silent workhorses,
Hmm.
essential everywhere from huge factories down to the corner coffee shop.
It really makes you stop and think, doesn't it? This
Yeah.
whole deep dive into drink hoses, it just reveals this vital industry kind of hidden in plain sight, quietly making sure we can get a drink.
Mm.
Makes you wonder what other really essential complex systems or components are just all around us, totally taken for granted. And how are they changing with all the new technology and the push for sustainability? Something to think about.